I think some firms are willing to work I think some firms are willing to work with suppliers, some of the food processing firms, et cetera, to improve quality. Cocoa, chocolate, stuff like that. Cocoa, coffee. Yeah, I think there are some cases. I mean, my understanding is Starbucks, has pretty good relations with coffee producers, works with them, improves their technology, gives them ideas, helps them, et cetera. And then in turn gives Starbucks a good, a long-term supply of good quality coffee. Yeah. So I think there are some times when that makes sense. Manufacturing, I think, is trickier, but in agricultural production, I think there are opportunities for cooperative situations. Yeah, I agree. I mean, how many there are, I'm not sure, but I think yes, I think there are. Yes.
I have a conceptual question regarding. When you said the private business regulation in the beginning, that negates states.
When I said the
private business regulation, they negates nation states.
Well, it doesn't negate them; it bypasses them.
Bypasses them.
It could bypass them, yeah.
But which is a kind of let's say global, cosmopolitan kind of disposition of individuals to seeing the world as one community.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, you say that implementation can work only through public policy, which is controlled by nation states.
Right.
That is fundamentally a boundary of individual, let's say, communities for many historical reasons.
Yeah.
So this is also a conceptual question that I have struggled in my research. How do you think this can be reconciled, this need for a global ethical standard?
My hope is, I think the hope
and research-wise, I'm talking, how do you conceptualize this in terms of when you are like studying something?
Well, I think what the focus should be is on the interaction between the private standards and the public policy standards in developing countries. How are they implementing? How does one reinforce the other, work together, contradict the others, move the other upward? I think that's the real challenge. Okay. So in principle, I don't know if this is happening, but in principle, so X company goes in and says, okay, we want palm oil to be produced in ways which which don't destroy the forest, whatever. Okay, and so the Unilever puts a lot of pressure on the suppliers, and so they change the way a lot of palm oil is produced. And then, it looks like it makes sense. They get access to exports of palm oil, etc. And then maybe the local government, the government says, gee, this makes sense. We can comply with this standard. Let's make it a national law. So that would be sort of a model as to how that could happen. Bolivia, for example, has recently adopted a forestry law, which is modeled on the Forest Stewardship Council. They basically said, we would consider that if you comply with the FSC, you are complying with Bolivian law. So these things could complement each other, ideally. That I think would be the hope. So as China moves to environmental standards and it imposes conditions on its factories, to what extent will it use the Western standards or the Western imposition as sort of a model, drawing from the learning curve. So we learn how to do this, and we can do it, it proves we can do it, and let's extend to everyone. That would be the ideal. I don't know if that's happening, but I think that's the vision.
About this, there's some recent research that actually goes to show that this can have an extremely destabilizing effect, actually, when developing countries do this. There's a 2009 paper by Levetsky and Moreau, for example, on stability and enforcement, and they show that these are very much related. The less stable a certain law is, the more that is changing, especially extremely quickly, the more difficult it is for developing countries to enforce it. And I wanted to ask you, conceptually, for kind of purporting a learning curve model, which is some sort of exogenous legal reliance as opposed to endogenous legal building, this cuts into a really old debate in law and development, which is how to actually build up this sort of endogenous legal development. And most recent research, at least, is not very encouraging. So I was just wondering for your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I don't know that literature, but I wouldn't be surprised that it wasn't very encouraging. But again, okay, so we can focus on Nigeria and be depressed. But you look at China. I'm no expert on China, but my sense is the Chinese have figured out that they have serious environmental problems. Right? They have which are interfering with development. They have big problems of air pollution. They have big problems of water pollution. Big problems of losing arable land. They're beginning to address. They're beginning to address these issues. They have a large middle class which would like to breathe, which was true in the West. Okay, they are facing water shortage problems. They are facing with enormous pollution, pesticide pollution, and so China is moving towards organic. For example, on GM cotton, right? As is India, as a way of reducing pesticide use. Very encouraging. A lot of progress. Okay, a lot of reduction of pesticide use, helping improving worker health and safety. So it doesn't. They don't have to worry about Europeans because because GM cotton isn't labeled under European law. Only food is labeled, so they can get it by. I don't know. Greenpeace doesn't make a fuss. So I think that's I think things like that are encouraging.
Well, if I may respond to that, I think China is a bit atypical in the sense that there's a strong central government.
Yeah, fair enough.
Unlike many other developing countries or emerging markets. Because I see at least three problems. One is priority, economic development is prioritized over the environment. Second is an implementation problem,
right.
They don't have the capacity, and thirdly there's corruption.
Yeah, right.
So I would love to buy your idea that these private labels can diffuse and be adopted in developing countries. Yet I'm a bit skeptical as to their prospects.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's rough. I think it's rough sledding. I think if you look at China or India, it looks pretty. It's pretty uneven. But I think there are some areas of progress, and I think if governments understand that these things make sense, they will move towards them. But I don't, I think in terms of development are really important, and they're serious issues. We'll see on climate change. I mean, will people wake up and say, it makes, even though it costs money, it's in our interest to keep the seas from rising, hopefully. But it's a tricky business, and I do think on these issues, with the lack of support for these initiatives from the U.S. is a very serious problem, and it's not getting any better. I think that's a big deal. I think that's a big deal. Yeah.
Thinking about the boundaries of each country.
Yeah.
Relating to the previous questions, most developing countries have at least state-owned or state-oriented firms.
Yeah, a lot of it, right.
And how do you think that would facilitate, the establishment of these standards, or even?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, it can make it easier or harder, right? It's hard to know. I think the general pattern in the West, at least, is that it's harder to regulate state-owned firms because the government has to pay for its own compliance. Well, in a private-owned firm, the burden goes on the shareholders. I think it's harder. I think it's harder to regulate state-owned firms. I think it's harder. And I think it's a serious problem.
If I may still follow up on an earlier question of Hans about the intangibles, I'm still a bit confused since you say you're skeptical about consumers willing to pay a premium. And
in those cases, unless they can get some real benefits, yeah.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. Yet still you indicate that a lot of firms care about it and
it's a reputation management.
Yeah, but why should they care about it if their consumers don't?
That's a very good question, and the bottom line is they do care. They do care. I mean, that's an excellent question, which puzzles me all the time. It's become a norm. They care. They see other firms doing it. They want to do it. It's become a business norm. I mean, every big firm issues an elaborate 100-page corporate sustainability report, which lists all the things, their goals, their objectives, what they've accomplished, the awards they've won, the recognition they've received, the ethical investment firms, it lists them, okay? Who reads this? Who reads these reports? Okay, not average citizens. Activists read these reports. Journalists read these reports. Maybe the employees read these reports. whoever reads these reports, it obviously pays for the companies to issue them, and they care what they say. Do they matter? Is there a business logic behind it? No. But you have all these funds. You have FTSE for Good. Okay, the big London-based ethical investment label criteria. Okay, so they go to Coca-Cola. I'm going to do stuff on Coke. Go to Coke and say, okay, we're open to considering listing you, and in order to do that, you have to give us all this information. So Coke could respond, who cares? But Coke figures, gee, it'd be nice to be listed, FTSE for Good, one of the good companies. And so they issue it. Does it affect their share price? No. Do they? But I think firms care about their reputations, and I think firms, based including in Asia, increasingly. I think it's important to recognize that firms basically, we want to be seen as profitable, of course. We want to be seen as good places to work. We want to be seen as environmentally and socially responsible. We want everything. Okay? We want to be considered, the most profitable firm, the most responsible firm, the best place to work firm, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? I think firms are very competitive, and they compete on this stuff as well, and they care. Does it make sense for them to compare? And they have staffs, okay? So they have a corporate responsibility staff. They have 4, 5, 6, 7 people, or 120 people who work for Nike, okay? And what do these people do? Well, they go to a conference, right? So I get advertisements. I don't go to these because I'm not an executive, but there must be CSR conferences on all these subjects every week somewhere in the world, mostly in London, actually. Okay, so all these companies send people there, okay? They go to the conferences, okay? And then the conferences feature reports and lectures and workshops by leading firms in the industry. So obviously, all these firms would like to have their people up on the podium to educate the fellow executives as to the wonderful things they're doing. Why? I don't know, but they do. They do. They care. It's become a business norm. Firms do a lot of things that are somewhat irrational. Most things, actually.
I think it's a belief, right? A belief that reputational damage by virtue.
Yeah, it's a way of improving employee morale.
There's a lot of that belief out there that's simply not true.
Right.
Right?
Right.
People still believe it.
Yeah, people believe a lot of things that aren't true. Most things, actually. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they care. That's right. They care. They care about these issues, and it makes them vulnerable. I remember talking to someone at Honda. Let me give you an example. Okay. So here's Honda, this nice automobile firm. Pretty good environmental program. So they sit with me and they want some advice on how to design their sustainability report. They've lunch with the guys. So I say, why do you care? Who reads this? What's the point? Why are you bothering? So he says, well, these NGOs, all these environmental groups, they watch us, they talk to us, they monitor us, they're criticizing us. We want them to be seen as good guys by them. End of story. End of story.